Frisian forks, pony prodders, OTTB ticklers. Hello, this is Daniel Dauphin. Welcome to another episode of Juvenile Drawings by a Fully Grown Man. We're here today to talk about Spurs. This is sort of a video I've been intending to shoot for quite a while, but I didn't really have the collection of Spurs that I wanted to show. And in our last video, when I kind of got into the drawing on a board thing, it opened the door to do this video relatively easily. So here we go. So I guess the first question about Spurs is why? Why would you ever need to take a piece of steel and grind it into the tender rib cage of an equine? It's an aid. It's no different than any other aid. A bit, a crop, reins, your calf for that matter. They're all simply aids that help get the horse to feel what your seat was telling them to do. So the seat is ultimately the thing that controls the horse. Everything away from and beyond the seat is simply an aid. So a spur is an aid, no better or worse than anything else. It has no more potential to cause pain than anything else does. Just as we said in the bit video that it's the hands of the rider that matter, it's the legs of the rider that determine whether the spur is going to be an issue for the horse or not. So, and in addition to why, they particularly for an advanced rider, spurs help give you that little bit of extra oomph. They do help with the timing of your communication with a horse. So let's say in a situation where I'm doing a more technical sort of maneuver like a lead departure. Well, the way that you should use your leg is you're going to start at your seat, then your upper leg is going to affect the horse, and then your lower leg, your calf, and all is going to affect the horse, and the last thing would be the spur, and we could escalate beyond that sequence. Well, the thing is that my leg wrapping around the horse is a fairly dull signal. Timing wise, it's not an on-off switch sort of a signal, whereas a spur touching the horse and then not touching the horse is a pretty black and white on and off sort of a signal. So for something technical like a lead departure or lead change and numerous other maneuvers, a spur gives me, or any advanced rider, the ability to touch that horse specifically when his feet are situated so that he can roll up out of the ground into a lead departure or something like that. So they definitely do aid in more technical riding. When are you as a rider ready to ride with spurs? It's very much a earn your spurs thing in my opinion. The major criteria for me with a rider is that they have sort of conquered basic horsemanship so they can get their respect from the horse. We're not fighting the simplistic battles of that sort of thing. That the person has got an independent seat. They're not at the point of trying to balance off of their hands. They are at the point where I could ask them to lope a circle around the arena on the horse with your feet forward of where they normally would be. Now lope a circle with your feet back of where they normally would be. And that person could adjust to that awkward situation because their seat is developed enough. So that person can ride through a bobble. They could have a horse that jumped to the side a little because it got scared, or jumped across a ditch or something, and they're going to have enough control of their seat and balance that they're not going to come in with their legs and gig the horse and exacerbate the situation. So that is when you're ready to ride with spurs, when your independent seat is well enough developed that you will use the spurs purposefully and not accidentally, and not just in the perfect case scenarios. I want to see somebody that could kind of ride through a bobble without gigging the horse. When is the horse ready? Any horse can be ridden with a spur from the get-go. I start all of my colts with spurs on. That's not something that I advise that everybody do. I mean, that's something I'm pretty experienced in. I know plenty of guys that are well experienced, even more so than I, that don't believe in riding colts in the beginning with spurs, and I mean, that's perfectly fine. It's certainly not something I would advise most people to do. But once the horse is comfortable packing a rider around, I I mean, you can go with spurs right then and there. Again, it's no more aggressive to ride a horse around with spurs than it is to ride a horse around with a snaffle bit. That's all determined by the rider and the control that they have. So I'll say that is the important part, is the rider. I do get horses in regularly, the problem horses that I take, that I get horses lots of times that come with a specific bit and he only likes this bit, or he can't be ridden with a bit at all. And guess what? Yeah, he can if the bit's handled fine and they kind of get rehabbed and then they're ready for the world. The same thing with spurs. I get horses in that can't be ridden with spurs, and yeah, they can. I very seldom do I take my spurs off, and when I do, it tends to be on an advanced horse that I am generally it's when I feel like I've been overusing my spurs. I'm getting a little dependent on them with that advanced horse, and I kind of want to see where we're at when I take them off. That's about the only time I don't ride with spurs. Donkey demanders, appa-sailors, mule musters. We're going to get into the heel band of the spurs and sort of how they should fit on your boot and all. First of all, let me point this out. This is my current pair of boots that I'm riding in, and I want to show you the spur ledge that goes around the heel of that boot. That is going to really help hold that spur, and where it can bounce up and down as we're riding around and make that cool sound while I walk. And that spur ledge is really going to help keep that spur where it should be. For a Western riding boot, I'm pretty much absolutely want a spur ledge on there. For an English boot, you're not going to find that as an option. The spur should fit in this area. One of the reasons we want a spur ledge, I don't like to see spurs on the actual heel of the rider's boot. For one thing, that's going to be in danger of slipping off. For another, you're not going to have nearly the same feel for the spur if it's not actually touching you. Okay, so I want that spur to be right around the heel of my foot. I don't want it to be somewhere else. I'll sometimes see English riders, of course they're going to have a much different boot, but they'll have their spur up here more in the Achilles tendon area of their leg, and I really don't like to see that. To me, whether you ride English, Western, or whatever, your spur should be right here on the back of your actual heel. One thing that I would like to point out, you'll notice the way my heel band is shaped, it does have some loose action on my boot, and that's how I would want my spur to work. I'll get into strapless, kind of the push-on spurs in just a second, but the spurs are made of metal. I don't know exactly what this particular pair is. I guess it's stainless steel. I've got another. These are definitely a high carbon type of a steel custom set of spurs that I have. Metal can be bent, okay? So if you have a heel band that is too tight on your foot and it's kind of pushing in on you there as your heel transitions into your arch, you need to bend that. Don't live with it. So next time your farrier's out, they could very easily take that on their anvil and spread it. You could take a pipe in a building that's holding the roof up and just use that and kind of gently tap your spur on there. I mean, if you have like some nice silver custom spurs, wrap it with a towel or something where you don't mar the finish of that spur. But it's easily bent. I've seen some of the cheaper pairs that I could just bend with my hands to get them to fit the rider better. So don't just live with that. It's definitely something you can customize to your foot. So we talked about sort of the slip-on English spurs just a second ago. Not a fan. I guess that's the biggest thing that I would have to say about that. I don't see where there's the need to have a strapless spur. You could pretty easily go on the internet and find pictures of horses that were loping around an arena and stepped on a spur that had come off of a rider and it went into their hoof. Again, it's one of those things that I see no pros to, other than maybe some convenience for the rider. and there's most definitely some bad things that can happen if that spur were to come off. So not a fan of strapless spurs or the push-on type. You know, if you want to use them, that's fine. I'd prefer we not ride in the same arena, because I sure don't want your spur coming through the sole of my horse's hoof. Also, I'll say with a Western spur, there are times when I want some play in that spur and how I'll use it. I'll go into that more in the back of this video, but there are more the Spanish or Vaquero type spurs will very commonly have a chain that'll come under the heel here. For other spurs, English and Western, there are rubber tie downs and things that'll really fix that spur where it's not going to move on your boot. You're going to lose that cool noise when you walk, for one thing, but there are times when I want that. I can use the roll of that spur bouncing up and down as part of my signal for my horse. So I'm not a fan of that. I would rather just a good spur ledge, a good fit of my heel band. I like a good heavy spur, and that's going to help keep that heel band down there where it should be. Even if it bounces up, it's going to return. When I see people that'll have a spur that'll get caught in this position on them and it'll ride up all the time, that always means two things. One, the spur band is adjusted too tightly where it's not easily coming back down, and two, they generally are wearing a very lightweight spur. The weight is going to again help that spur come back where it should be. It also allows you, just like with the rings of a bit, when we get into a super light bit, it robs us and the horse of a lot of feel. It's the same thing with a spur. I kind of want some spurs that have got some weight to them. It's for people that aren't used to spurs that weigh a decent bit. It annoys them in the beginning. It's something you as a rider and a person walking around will have to get used to. There's a definite advantage of feel to a heavier spur. So that'll transition us into the heel bands. When it comes to the heel bands of a spur, to me, a 1 inch wide heel band is sort of the standard. I'm not a fan of the real small, narrow ones, and hopefully you would understand why at this point. And you get into a 1 1/4 inch heel band or a little bigger, you know, you're definitely adding some weight there that I don't know is necessarily warranted. Anything below like 3/4, and for like a kid or a woman, a smaller person, a 3/4 heel band would be just fine. But when you get below that, again, you're getting into that light spur that's going to go up and stay there. It's not going to return to where it should be, and you're not going to have as much of a feel for that spur and what you're doing with it. You know, again, the ability to know that you touched the horse or that you didn't, and to do that on purpose is paramount. If you don't have control of your spurs, if you can't feel where they are and what they're doing, you shouldn't be riding with them. So that weight of the spur is a big factor in that. Mare motivators, cob coachers, filly finaglers, a non-governmental stimulus package. Bumper spurs was one of the things I was requested to talk about. A bumper spur is going to have sort of a little set of ridges that's going to go right along the heel band right there. So it's going to be the type of spur that's going to give you the most full contact with the horse. It's going to be a very mild type of spur. So bumper spur, let's say that we again looked at that heel band from the top. It would have maybe just a little bar with some very rounded sort of points that would come off of it like that. This would be what a bumper type spur would be for. This is, it's not going to be a very effective aid, so you're not going to really see too many advanced riders using something like this. But if you have a real novice rider that's trying to get into spurs, or you have maybe a very sensitive horse and a novice rider, or like a kid beginning to ride with spurs, this is a pretty good design to begin them with. It gives them sort of a feel for spurs. They have a little extra aid there if they need it, but they're not going to get themselves into too much trouble with a bumper style of spur. Hanoverian hagglers, equine enablers, pre-pushers, Lipizzan lopers. So let's talk a little bit about Shank Angle. Because my colt riding spurs, I like angled in a little bit. I also am riding a very blunt rowel. We'll talk about rowels in a moment. But these are two common styles that you will see. I'd say most spurs are this style of a straight shank, but you should be aware that some of them have a shank that is somewhat angled inward, and this would always be angled toward the horse. What an angled shank is going to do is allow the rider to touch the horse with the spur with very little toe out action. So with a spur like this, let's assume you're riding properly and your feet are pointed straight ahead, you're going to have to toe out in order to bring that shank of that spur in to touch the horse. You won't have to toe out nearly so much with an angled shank. I personally like this style for riding colts because the way that I want to ride colts, I'm wrapping my legs around them. I'm really letting them get full contact of my legs and touching them with the spurs quite a bit and trying to develop a level of comfort with that. With this style of spur, I would have to sort of exaggerate my riding a bit more in order to do that. Now, if we have a rider, forgive the picture, but let's say that this is a horse's barrel. We're looking at him from the chest or something, and we've got kind of the widest part of the barrel. Let's say that you are a short-legged rider or you're a normal rider on a really big horse, and your legs in stirrups only come to here, about to that barrel. If you're riding with an angled in spur, you're going to likely be engaged an awful lot, more than you probably mean to. So if you are a short-legged rider or you're a rider on a horse with a big barrel where you're not really getting below that barrel, then this spur is going to make life harder on you and harder on the horse, and you're better off with a straighter shank type of a spur. We'll talk about some other factors in a second. But just be aware, and this isn't necessarily wrong. Again, you know, it just has its place, and not every place is a proper place for it. Rib reminders. Let's talk about a different angle that the shanks can take, and this is a pretty important thing. A lot of times when people are buying spurs, they're looking at different designs and they're picking them based on aesthetics, what they think is stylish. And yeah, not so much. There's definitely a rhyme and reason to it. So again, looking at our horse's barrel, this is more of a standard spur. Anytime you're looking at design, you need to focus on where your eye is drawn. So our center of rowel with a standard balanced spur is going to be basically lined up with the center of the heel band. Okay, so for an average size person on an average size horse, where you are, it's the blue one, so let's say your legs are hanging to about here on either side, so you are below your level of widest part of the barrel, but you're not way below it, then an average length of shank and an average balance of shank would be a perfectly appropriate spur for you. If you are a shorter type person, then you're going to want a shank balance more like this one where it's dropped. Okay, so we've got our shorter person in here, and their legs are only getting right to maybe just below that widest part of the barrel. You're going to want a spur that's going to help you get under here a little bit and won't be engaged all the time. And so that's what a dropped shank will do for you. If you're riding with a long shank or a raised or even balanced shank, your spurs are going to tend to engage on the horse too much, simply because of the position of your legs relative to their barrel. So if you're a shorter legged person, this is your friend. All right, for the long legged people, and they are wrapping way on down here, and their spurs or feet wind up below the belly of the horse, well, they need a little help to get back up here and actually be able to make contact with their spur on the horse. So they're going to want the type of shank that is raised up. Okay, so not a great deal of difference. I mean, the center of this rowel and the center of this rowel may only be off 2 inches or something, but every little bit helps or hurts depending on your particular need and setup. So you may actually be a person who's average size, and if you happen to be riding a 17.5 hand Clydesdale and you've got a 14 hand quarter horse that you're riding, you may need a very different spur, you know, on each of those horses, just depending on need. Shank length, I didn't draw this very well, but let's we'll just take our standard heel band again, and let's say that we had a shank that was this long and the rowel was right there. This is going to allow more contact of your leg, so you're going to have to more fully wrap the horse with your legs before that type of rowel would engage on the horse. So again, I tend to like a shorter type of a shank on a colt, and it's also better for a shorter leg person so they're not engaging all the time. When you get like beyond a 2-inch long shank, that's a longish shank in my opinion. Then you really need to be on more of a long-legged rider that's kind of underneath the horse and needs that length to engage again. So I guess that is sort of shanks in a nutshell. I get one other little thing. If we do get into maybe a Chihuahua type spur or something with a real big rowel, and don't pass judgment on big rowels just yet. We'll talk about them in just a second. But like a Chihuahua type spur, nice big open design, and that would generally have a pretty darn big rowel on it. Well, let's say that spur had a 3-inch rowel. Well, from your pin back to the heel band is going to have to be more than 1.5 inches, because half of that rowel is 1.5 inches. So, you know, you may have to have a longer shank length for a really big spur, or really big rowel rather. And the length of the rowel behind that heel band is going to exacerbate how long that's going to feel and act for you. So, you know, riding with a spur like this will probably take a good bit of getting used to, because that thing's going to be sticking out behind your heels way more than what something like that would feel. Not necessarily a right or a wrong, but just, you know, it's the mechanics of how the shank has to work. Mongolian meat hooks. Now we're finally getting into what can make a horse more severe or less severe. Sort of like my disclaimer on the bit videos, just do remember that no spur is severe unless the leg that it's attached to is severe. So, you know, keep that in mind. Riding a horse with spurs does not equate to causing pain to the horse. It can equate to discomfort, and a lot of times unintentional discomfort, and that's what we're going to get into. English people, feel free to put your helmets on, because this may be a bit of a crash for you. Rowels versus rowel-less. Rowels are this portion of a spur that'll spin. I'll get into them secondly, but there are definitely different types of spurs that do not have a rowel. We talked about a bumper spur just a little bit ago, which may have something along those lines to it. A ball spur would be another fairly common type, which would have a shank like that, and along the end of it, it might have just a big ball of metal, something like marble size. Now those can vary. I've also seen ball spurs that had a very small ball on the end, like a pencil sized ball. So hey, while we're at it, let's draw one. I'm having fun with all this drawing. I hope y'all are having fun with all this drawing. And then the very common slip-on spur that we see in English would commonly just have a small narrow band and a little short shank coming out of it that is generally the same diameter as the band, and again typically about pencil sized. So all of these would be examples of rowel-less spurs. Now typically I would imagine, and I hear, that people believe that a rowel-less spur is automatically a very mild spur. That's true in a lot of cases. Okay, I would say that this is a very mild spur. I would say that this is a very mild spur. I would say that this one and this one are both very severe. Okay, what that comes down to is surface area. When we talk about bits and things, you know, people have a lot of feel and a lot of awareness in their hands naturally. You're going to have more of that in your hands than you are in your feet, just typically. And I'll give you an example of that. How many of us have reached across the table and accidentally bumped a glass and knocked it down? Okay, everybody, right? How many of you cried like a little baby and made a big old hoo-la over how bad your hand or finger hurt from doing that? Nobody, right? Okay, now how many of us have stubbed our toe against a coffee table in the middle of the night and rolled around on the floor like like they just cut your leg off or something, right? Your legs move with way more force than you think that they do. And that comes into play with spurs as well. So when we have something with a very large surface area like this or like this, when you bring that leg in, that surface area spreads the force across a larger area, and so it's not a poke sort of a feel. When we have something very tiny, and again, this is even not drawn to scale. This would be life size. You have something that small that comes in with the force of a leg and pokes a horse, you can very easily get into pain, even though you didn't really feel like you did much with your leg to cause pain. So, like I'll say, one of the vices that I see just rampant in the English world is tail swishing. I have people forward me dressage videos. I'm a fan of dressage. I certainly try to learn from that world and practice plenty of that stuff myself. But when I have these videos, even of Olympic level horses, the very best horses in the world, they want to say how subtle the rider is in the cues. I could see every cue that the rider is given, whether I see their leg move or not, because 95% of those horses are swishing their tail every single time they're touched. I would say that the sharpness of a spur like this is a very large part of that problem and the cause of that vice. So I've also seen like polo ponies. I had a picture that I was going to use in a blog on the website. I found a horse that had been raked and gouged, and I mean was sliced open. It had the rider and the spur and all, and it was Prince Harry of England that had done it. And if anyone has had proper riding instruction in their life, I'm kind of guessing those boys got pretty good riding instruction and pretty nice horses to ride. So this is not something that should be questioned. Surface area does determine severity with all aids. These type of spurs, which are so common in English, are extremely severe spurs. And I see kids riding with 11 and 12-year-olds that are just beginning to jump and things like that, and really are borderline not needing to ride with a spur yet at all, and have something that severe on, and neither the trainer nor the kid seems to understand how dadgum severe these types of spurs are. So just be really conscious of that. And I'll have a severe example in the Western world too. I mean, I'm not just harpooning English here, but these would all be examples of rowel-less spurs, and again, two of them are quite severe. All right. So now for some talk about rowels. With rowels, it really all comes down to the surface area again. Generally, rowels are going to be named by the point. So like this would be a mimic of the Colt spurs that I'm wearing right now. These would be called 6 point, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them blunt, and they are a pretty blunt spur. You can obviously see that doesn't really have any sharp edges on it. You may get into something like this. Might be a 14 point. There could be some larger 2, 2.5, 3 inch rowels. Might be 24 or even 30 point rowels. The number of points does not automatically tell you how mild or severe the spur is. Okay, so This would be a 6-point blunt that is a very mild spur. This would be more of a Spanish influenced vaquero kind of a rowel, a 5-point, and this is a very severe spur. Again, because of the surface area, you can see how much room there is to kind of grab hide in between those rowels, making each point a very, very pointed, sharp point. So this style of rowel, when you'll see, this will be a very mild style of rowel. This would be a very mild style of rowel. This, believe it or not, is again a fairly mild style because again there's not a lot of room in here. So when we touch the horse, we're gonna kind of be touching him with a pretty broad surface area and not a small pokey surface area. This was my interpretation of a rock grinder rowel, which is one of the most severe. The rowel is going to have a lot of points on it and very, very, very sharp points. If you really kick a horse with this, you can slice them right open. A lot of the times when you'll see old horses that have dimples on their ribs, that's from a spur like this that actually cut the muscle in there. Definitely not something I would be proud of. Okay, and these are embarrassingly drawn. Again, I wanted to bring in the little English shank on there. Surface area wise, right? If that's a life-size drawing of how big the surface area is versus, you know, any of these others, you can see that one would be far more severe. I also wanted to do, again, a terrible drawing, but the equivalent of this shank is in Western is one that I unfortunately see quite a bit. And I alluded with this when I was talking about the heel bands, but very commonly you'll see this style of spur. It's usually got like a 10-point rowel on it. It has a very narrow heel band. It's a very lightweight spur. Has a moderate shank, and then a very small little 10-point rowel on it. And people would generally look at that and say, well, it's very small, it must be a very mild spur. I see tons of women and children riding around with this spur. It would be any tag catalog that you care to look in, you'll find it. And in reality, it is a very severe style of spur. And again, because of the surface area, it's a very pokey sort of a deal. You can imagine if I were to push against your arm with my fist and I put 100 pounds of force on it and I just held it there for 2 minutes and withdrew, really wouldn't be too sore. If I took my finger and put it against your arm and again put 100 pounds of force on it for 2 minutes, you'd be crying. You know, you'd be bruised, it'd be hurting you for weeks. Same thing here. You want bigger, blunter is going to be milder. So do not assume that the English rider with those little spurs or the woman or the kid with those little spurs has the mild spurs and that cowboy with those great big rowels has the cruel ones. Likely the opposite is true. And let me not use the word cruel there. I hate assigning something like that to an inanimate object. No spur is cruel until a person makes it so. Right. All right. That's kind of rowels, rowelless, the surface area deal again. I think that pretty well wraps up my ideas and videos on spurs. I hope that's been some help for you. I hope next time you're out to buy some spurs or maybe get some custom, hey buddy, hey, maybe having some custom spurs made, you'll have a much better idea of the hows and whys and what should fit you and your purposes more or what wouldn't fit you at all. So, all right. Again, it's Daniel Dauphin with Dauphin Horsemanship. Thank you much. Please like and subscribe to our channel. See you on the flip side.
Now you're done. I was being very quiet.
You were. A little bit of the methodology of the aid. So we should be riding with our seat. If we need more than just the tilting of our pelvis and kind of lifting up to get the horse moving, then we would be kind of going down our leg using our upper thighs to grip the horse a bit more. If that doesn't get a response, then we'd be going to our calves and squeezing the horse a bit more, and if that doesn't get a response, then we would go to our spur to touch the horse. All of that is called the escalation of aids. There are further escalations that one could use with a spur. So if I were having a horse that I was making contact with my calf and he didn't respond, then actually before I would touch with my spur, I might just kind of bump him like so with the side of my leg, and you can hear my spur making some noise there, but I wouldn't actually be touching the horse with the spur. I could then bring the spur in and kind of give him a couple of little bumps. Okay, and this wouldn't be painful. I would do this, I am doing this regularly, the very first ride. This is not something that's going to make most horses crawl out of their skin. If I need to do more than that, one of the advantages of having a rowel is that you can really turn your toe out and bring that rowel against the horse and draw your leg up. And imagine if I had chinks and chaps and that would kind of fly, and you've got that noise and that big motion. And so without being painful at all, you'll notice I'm doing this to my own leg repeatedly, and you don't hear my voice cracking or anything. This isn't painful to do, but you can imagine that doing that would get a whole lot of horses to bring in some life up in their feet. So it's really not so much about necessarily harpooning them with the spur. If I've warned them a few times and I am really fixing to kick a horse, when I kick them, I'm pretty well going to be bringing my toe forward and kicking them with the flat of my leg. And I do kick horses. I don't want anybody to, I'm not shying away from saying that. In fact, some of the very best advice I could give the majority of riders that I see is that you need to pull less and kick more. Unquestionably, 90% of the people that I see ride in the clinics, lessons, and things that I do, that's exactly what they need. They need to let go of the horse's face a whole lot and kick them a whole lot more. So just a way that you can be effective with the aid. It's another one of those reasons why I like that spur band to be able to bounce up and down on my boot. I could also do the opposite. I could kind of roll down, be a little bit gentler than the roll up. But if I were to do that with a shank that is fixed to my foot, it takes that give out, and it could make it pretty, kind of a harder rake on them. So one of those advantages to having a rowel, that's something you certainly couldn't do with a rowel-less style of spur, and particularly for colts, that ability to kind of rake it up, make all that noise and all that motion and everything really will get them to moving out. I think a lot of people that haven't ridden many colts have no appreciation for how much work is involved in actually getting that forward horse that will move out. That's always kind of step number one. Lots of horses tend to want to ball up and bind up and not move when you begin riding them. Having those tools to get them to moving out is a major factor. So two other little additions on here that you will see sometimes on a shank are a chap guard, and this isn't really the style that you'd see it, but sometimes you'll see a little piece coming up like that, and what that would be for is there's a fella's leg right there, and the back of his chaps would be coming down, and you wouldn't want that leather to get hung up in the rowel of your spur and get caught down in the shank and fork and all that. So this chap guard would keep your chaps from going back there, and I would say that it's probably more style than function there. I don't know that they really are that functional, but they're nice looking on the back of the shank. So again, that would be, you'd see something coming up, kind of a hump on the back of the shank there. One other thing that you'll see added is jingle bobs. So how do you make your spurs jingle jangle? If you hear somebody walking around in spurs and they are like 3 times louder than normal spurs, let's think Clint Eastwood on a boardwalk about to kill some bad guys with a poncho and a cigar. Jingle bobs are what's making all that noise. So what jingle bobs are, on the pin of the spur rowel right there, they will have usually 2 little bells that they hang on there, and that's essentially what they are. They are a little bell, and that bell will tap and vibrate up against that rowel, and the motion of the rowel combined with the bells just kind of magnifies or amplifies all that sounds, and it makes Spurs much louder, much more noticeable. Quite honestly, to me, it makes them too loud. I do like the sound of my Spurs. I don't really hear them most of the time until I go to Walmart or somewhere, and I forget that I still have them on, and they get awful loud when I'm in Walmart all of a sudden. But Jingle Bobs are seriously loud. Again, I kind of like the quiet of riding a horse all day. I don't like noise added in there. If you do, though, Jingle Bobs is the way to get that added to your Spurs. Isn't that just a cool sound? Isn't that just a cool sound?